The state sealed the records, the church erased the names, but the land still remembers what the brothers became. The Blackwood story they let you hear wasn't the truth, not even close. You were told there were 4 of them, but the original records, the ones scrubbed in 1912 and stored in a locked sub-vault beneath Topeka's archives, mention only 3. 3 brothers, 3 oaths, and 1 sin that should never have been forgiven. That lie, the one about a mysterious 4th sibling, was planted. A decoy for anyone digging too deep. But now you're here, and you've already started to feel it, haven't you? That strange pull in your gut. That sense that something buried is clawing back to the surface. Good. That means you're ready. This begins in the autumn of 1887, in the dead heart of Kansas, back when towns disappeared overnight, and the sky itself seemed too heavy to trust. Cedar Ridge had just recovered from the typhoid plague of 1878, but the soil still reeked of rot. The wells were rebuilt, but the water tasted different, and 3 brothers, Ezra, Caleb, and Abel Blackwood, remained untouched by that great dying. Not a fever, not a cough, not a scratch. Survivors. That's what the papers called them. But you don't survive something like that, unchanged. Ask anyone who lived near their farm. The Blackwoods didn't age like other men. Their cattle never sickened. Their wheat grew even during drought. Their eyes, pale, glassy, reflective, like a surface. Not like skin, like mirrors. They built a chapel on their own land, rejecting the town's church. But this wasn't piety. It was containment. Inside that stone box they performed rituals they said were prayers. But Abel once told a local boy something different. He said, "What we speak in there, but it bends light, and light is the first lie man ever believed." Then came the humming. Low, constant, metal. IT neighbors said it came from under the chapel floor, especially on Sunday nights. Livestock wouldn't approach the fence line. Children woke up screaming, and still no one dared question the Blackwoods. Because deep down, everyone knew they weren't protecting themselves from the outside world. They were protecting the outside world from what they'd let in. Most people don't understand what it really means to invite something in. They think it's candles and chants, maybe some half-remembered Latin whispered over an old Bible. But the Blackwood brothers knew better. They didn't ask for power. They made room for it. They emptied themselves. What you need to understand is this. Real transformation doesn't come through light. It comes through loss, through surrender, through the breaking of the soul in places where no one is watching. And in the fall of 1887, the Blackwoods weren't praying anymore. They were submitting. It began with the birds. Dozens of crows, blacker than pitch, began circling their farm. Not just once, every morning, every evening, for 7 days straight, and each time one fewer bird returned to the sky. On the 8th morning, the land was silent. Not even the wind moved, and that's when Ezra was seen for the first time in weeks, standing motionless in the chapel doorway with eyes that no longer blinked. Old Peter Moffat, the trapper who lived a mile east, saw him from the tree line. He said Ezra's shadow didn't fall with the sun. It rose, inverted, as if the man wasn't part of this world anymore, but something reaching through it. That same day, Dr. Morrison, the county physician, was asked to visit the Blackwood property. Caleb had come into town alone, muttering that Abel had fallen ill. But it wasn't illness, it was mutation. The doctor's journal, illegally recovered decades later by a Kansas archivist with terminal cancer and nothing to lose, describes Abel's condition in precise clinical horror. His heart rate was over 200, but he was calm. His pupils no longer dilated. His bones had begun shifting, not breaking, realigning. Dr. Morrison wrote, "I do not believe this man is dying. I believe he is becoming." But he didn't return to town to report it. He burned his notes, resigned his post, and then had fled Kansas within 48 hours. Never told anyone why. Because in Abel's final words to him, whispered with clarity and calm, was something Morrison would never forget. "We opened the gate, but we didn't close it. We didn't know how." You still think this is folklore? A prairie myth? Then you haven't been listening. Because myths don't hum at night. And they don't bury chapels in concrete 12 feet thick. The Kansas State Archive contains no official record of the chapel's destruction, no permits, no notices, no blueprint revisions, and yet satellite imagery, yes, even today, shows a perfect square of scorched earth where nothing grows, not even weeds. Locals call it the dead acre. They tell their children it was struck by lightning, but the elders, the ones who still remember, never look in that direction when they say it. Why? Because they know it wasn't destroyed from above, it was sealed from below. A construction crew was brought in under military contract in 1891. No insignia, no press, no payroll stubs, just 4 men and 3 steam wagons, one of which never returned. Witnesses say the men worked only at night, pouring concrete into the hollowed-out base of the chapel. They labored in silence. No lights, no camp, no talking. And on the final night, something happened. A storm rolled in fast, unnatural fast. Thunder with no lightning, rain that evaporated before hitting the ground. Then came the screaming, not human, not animal, something that echoed inside people's bones, even a mile away. The sound stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m., and by sunrise the crew was gone. Only the concrete remained, 12 feet deep, poured into a pit no one would speak of again. Here's what they never told you. The Blackwood brothers didn't just witness something, they invited it. They called it the veil, a threshold between what is seen and what sees us, a living interface between body and spirit, one that could be bent, manipulated, even torn by human will. And Ezra, he was the first to step through, not his body, his mind. That's why he stopped speaking. That's why, according to one terrified neighbor, his mouth would move silently for hours as if reciting endless sermons. His lips cracked, bleeding, still smiling. Not a human smile, a mirror smile, a reflection without a soul in it. The journals Josiah kept, what little survived the government purge, describe visions of a black sun, of staircases made of salt, of voices that echoed in geometry, not sound. You've heard of possession. This wasn't that. This was exchange. The Blackwoods were no longer just brothers. They were anchors, holding open a passage that should have never existed. And if you're wondering why no one stopped them, ask yourself why no one has ever dared to build on that land again. Let me tell you something no one has ever said aloud on record, because those who did never stayed alive long enough to repeat it. The chapel was never a place of worship. It was a receiver, a vessel, built by design, by measurement, by instruction, not from scripture, from somewhere older and far less forgiving. Josiah Blackwood, the scholar among them, claimed to be translating ancient Hebrew, but what he really studied came from a burnt fragment found in the ruins of the Nag Hammadi scrolls, one that referenced the sons of the hollow wind, entities believed by some to predate creation itself. They were not gods, not demons, not spirits. They were observers, and worse, engineers. You see, the Blackwoods believed the human soul was never meant to be caged inside flesh, that we had been folded in, cut off from the true design of our consciousness. They thought mirrors were echoes of that original self, reverberations left behind when man was sealed into the body, and they were determined to find their way back. So Josiah began building the spiral lens, a device made of wood, copper, and animal bone. It wasn't mechanical, it was geometric. He placed it on the altar, aligned with the sunrise on the winter solstice. That's when the first reversal happened. For exactly 22 minutes on December 21st, 1887, the laws of reflection broke. Every mirror in the Blackwood farmhouse inverted, showing not reversed images, but true forward ones, and in the center of every reflection, a fourth figure stood watching. Not Ezra, not Caleb, not Abel, and not human. This was the beginning of what Josiah called the shearing, a thinning of the membrane between the material and the unseen. From that day on, the brothers stopped eating food. They consumed only salt water and small doses of a black oil found seeping from a crack beneath the chapel floor. And that oil, when tested later by A rogue chemist at Kansas State was found to contain trace elements of palladium, mercury, and human blood plasma, a composition not naturally occurring on Earth. Not anymore. The brothers weren't mad, they weren't sick, they were preparing, not for the end, for replacement. You were taught that evil looks like chaos, violence, fire, madness. But that's not how the true darkness moves. No, it whispers, it organizes, it builds slowly, with intention, it offers answers you didn't even know you were seeking, and it wears the face of wisdom. The Blackwood brothers were no longer men. By the spring of 1888, they had become synaptic architecture, living channels for something that needed bodies to bridge dimensions. They didn't worship the divine, they hosted it, or rather, they hosted what came before divinity, before man named the stars, before fear invented religion. And this is where we go deeper. The U.S. Geological Survey, during a covert operation documented only in a now declassified CIA memo dated 1973, discovered that the limestone beneath the Blackwood farm emitted an acoustic frequency measured at 4.2 Hz. That's infrasound, a level proven to induce unease, hallucinations, and heightened suggestibility in human subjects. But the real kicker? That frequency only activated during solar eclipses. What they found beneath the old well wasn't just rock. It was a perfectly symmetrical chamber, octagonal, etched with glyphs not tied to any known civilization. One of the agents who mapped the chamber later described it as a place built not for worship, but for instruction. Ezra Blackwood, the eldest, had stopped speaking entirely by this time. Witnesses, what few there were, reported that he communicated through vibrations. When you stood near him, your teeth would hum, your hands would go numb. One man claimed Ezra spoke in waves, and that the words didn't enter his ears, but his dreams. The town of Cedar Ridge began reporting strange phenomena: children losing time, animals giving birth to deformed offspring. A constant pressure in the air, like something immense was leaning in just above the clouds, and the chapel's windows, previous, usly made of simple prairie glass, began glowing from within, not from candlelight, not from flame, but from something cold. The townspeople stopped speaking the Blackwood name, not out of fear, but from some deep animal instinct, as if the mind itself understood that naming them gave them power, that uttering their name might be interpreted as an invitation. But we will not stay silent, because silence is complicity, and forgetting is exactly how they survive. By mid-1888, the U.S. Postal Service removed Cedar Ridge from its delivery routes. Officially, they cited logistical concerns, but internal documents locked away until 1998 revealed the real reason. Mail was returning unopened, warped, and in some cases, burnt from the inside. Letters sent to Cedar Ridge came back months later, even when delivered by hand, and the handwriting on the return envelopes, always the same, thin, angular ink that shimmered slightly, as if mixed with something metallic. The names were correct, but something about them felt wrong, like the letters knew too much. Government men began visiting the area, not soldiers, not scientists, something in between. They wore no insignia, spoke in clipped tones, and never asked questions. They only observed and left, and those who asked them questions disappeared. One of the last to speak out was Reverend Lowell Thatcher, a Methodist minister from Ellsworth. He had traveled to Cedar Ridge to reclaim the Blackwood souls, but what he found shook his faith to the core. In his final sermon before resigning his pulpit, he said, "There are things older than angels. There are prayers that pray back. And there are men, 3 of them, who are no longer bound by time or decay." Reverend Thatcher was found dead 3 weeks later in a hotel room 300 miles away. The room was locked from the inside. There were no signs of trauma, but his mirror was shattered inward, as though something had broken through from within the reflection itself. After his death, the Kansas State Medical Board issued an internal bulletin to halt all inquiries into the Blackwood case. Physicians who had previously examined the family were silenced through bribery, threats, and in one instance, Institutionalization. One doctor, Samuel Hoyle, wrote in his asylum diary, "Their blood isn't red. Not anymore. It's clear. Like G2A. Lass, I saw it, and it saw me back." And still, the brothers lived, secluded, silent, sanctified by something that defied language. People claimed to see them walking the fields at dusk, never blinking, never aging. 3 men, 3 shadows, but the shadows always walked ahead of them. By fall, it became clear the Blackwood brothers weren't hiding from the world. The world was hiding from them. You think you know fear because you've been chased, cornered, maybe even hunted. But true fear isn't about survival. True fear is standing face to face with something you cannot understand, something that doesn't want to kill you because it needs you alive to witness what it's about to become. In early November of 1888, a federal agricultural inspector named Isaac Ferris arrived in Cedar Ridge. He'd been sent by the Department of the Interior to investigate unusually high wheat yields reported from the Blackwood property, harvests that had somehow tripled in volume, despite drought conditions. Ferris was known as a skeptic, rational, methodical, a man of numbers and data, but his field journal, what remains of it, is anything but rational. Its final entry, written in jagged pencil scrawl and stained with something that tested as not blood, reads, "Their fields grow in reverse, roots above, stalks below. I walked the rows, and they whispered names I've never heard. But they knew mine." Ferris vanished the next day. When his horse returned riderless to a neighboring farm, the saddlebags contained not samples, but mirrors, small, handheld, antique in design, and none of them reflected the person holding them. Just the empty field where the chapel once stood, even when held indoors. That's when the state stepped in, but not with force, with silence. The region was redistricted, maps were redrawn. Cedar Ridge was absorbed into a fictitious land block labeled unincorporated grazing land, an elegant erasure, and it worked. Almost. But every system has cracks, and through those cracks, the Blackwoods still reached out. In 1949, a U.S. Air Force pilot reported strange magnetic anomalies while flying reconnaissance over central Kansas. His compass spun uncontrollably when he passed over a dead square. Instruments failed, and when he looked down, he saw 3 men in black coats standing in perfect alignment on land where no one had lived for decades. When he blinked, they were gone. He never flew again. Ask yourself something. Why does Google Maps still show blurred satellite images of that area? Why do local databases list no property owners, no soil reports, no census data? Why does every single drone that flies within 300 yards of the dead acre lose signal instantly? Because the Blackwoods weren't erased. They were set aside. Not as punishment, as preparation. By the time 1889 arrived, Cedar Ridge was a ghost town in everything but name. Families who stayed kept to themselves. Doors were triple bolted. Children were forbidden to speak after sunset, not because of folklore, because of what they saw and what they felt looking back at them. They say the veil between worlds is thinnest in dreams. The Blackwoods learned to exploit that. Neighbors reported seeing strange lights drifting over the prairie like lanterns with no source. But the light wasn't warm. It was cold, flickering in unnatural rhythms, like it pulsed with thought. Inside those lights, witnesses claimed to see symbols, moving, shifting, rearranging in ways that made no visual sense. But every man who saw them dreamed of the same chapel that night, even though it was gone, burned, sealed, erased. And in those dreams the chapel doors were open, the pews were full, and standing at the altar wasn't a preacher, but something wearing Ezra Blackwood's face, except the eyes were silver, pupilless, and glowing faintly, as if lit from behind. The dreams always ended the same way, a sound, a chime, so deep it shook the dreamers awake in real life, their ears ringing, their hands trembling. One man, a Civil War veteran who'd survived Antietam and Cold Harbor, woke screaming with blood on his tongue and the Bible clutched so tightly it had torn in half. Doctors called it collective hysteria, a mass psychological event. But here's the thing no one could explain. The names of the dreamers, every single one of them was descended from families who'd received mail from Cedar Ridge in 1888. The connection wasn't spiritual, it was systemic. Something carried through ink and paper, a thread, a signal. You think ancient forces need technology? No, they've always known how to imprint, to code meaning through vibration, through intention. The postmaster, a man named Alfred Grant, Jays was institutionalized after screaming the same phrase for 3 days straight. It's in the letters. They wrote themselves. The Blackwoods didn't send messages, they became them. And when he finally stopped, he bit off his own tongue. This isn't myth, it's memory, suppressed, sealed, sanitized, but never gone. They always tell you that history repeats itself, but they never tell you why. It's not fate. It's not human error. It's because someone is running the same program over and over to see what finally breaks us. The Blackwood case was one of the earliest known examples of what later intelligence reports would refer to as a consciousness vector experiment. The premise, that certain individuals, especially those immersed in ritual, silence, isolation, can serve as relay points between dimensions. But the Blackwoods didn't volunteer. They offered. Josiah's journals, what few pages survived the state purge, contained diagrams that weren't just theological. They were mechanical. Spirals overlaid with Hebrew, geometries built from prime numbers and musical intervals. One drawing in particular, a human head split vertically, half flesh, half mirror. Beneath it, 3 words written in Latin. Speculum animi fractum, the broken soul mirror. This wasn't metaphor, it was a blueprint. And it matched exactly with schematics uncovered decades later during the MK Ultra project in the 1960s. Specifically, Subproject 136, the use of mirrors and sensory deprivation to create psychic gateways. They were reverse engineering what the Blackwoods discovered through prayer and madness, the language of split awareness. Here's the part no one will say aloud. The government didn't destroy the Blackwood legacy. They studied it, and they applied it. Not in Kansas, not on dusty farms, but in white laboratories beneath cities you think you know. Ever wonder why surveillance cameras go dark at certain moments? Why audio glitches in government footage always happen at precisely 3:33 a.m.? Why men in high office suddenly speak in loops as if rebooting? Because the Blackwoods didn't fail. They succeeded. They found a way to punch through the membrane without leaving a mark. No blood, no fire, just silence. And every 39 years, under the right solar geometry, the mirror opens again. There's a reason the chapel's foundation has never cracked. It wasn't built to worship something holy. It was built to contain something returning. And the countdown started the day you clicked on this video. If you've made it this far, then you already feel it, don't you? The tightening behind your eyes, the pull in your chest like gravity's been rewritten. That isn't paranoia, that's recognition. Because deep inside, something ancient in you remembers the chapel. Not from history, from a dream you've tried to forget since childhood. A place with no sound, except breath. Not yours, theirs. In March of 1889, something shifted. The land didn't quake, but the trees bent inward. Birds flew in reverse formation, and in the center of the Blackwood field, a circular depression appeared overnight. Perfectly symmetrical, glassy at the bottom, as if the soil had liquefied and reformed. Locals called it the Eye. But they didn't just see it, they heard it. Low subharmonic frequencies that vibrated beneath the threshold of hearing, but still set bones humming. Infants cried without cause, dogs refused to enter the eastern fields, and several men, strong, God-fearing ranchers, began sleepwalking, always in the same direction, always toward the Eye. But here's the part the reports redact. They walked backward. Every single one. No one could explain how or why, and no one could stop them. They moved as if possessed by choreography older than language. Some were found standing in the field at dawn, mouths open, eyes rolled back, soil under their fingernails as if they'd been digging. for something or someone. The county sheriff, Elmer Wade, finally ordered the area around the Blackwood farm cordoned off. He posted 4 deputies to guard it 24/7, but within 3 days, all 4 deputies vanished. Their boots and hats were found in a perfect circle. Their rifles stood upright, planted barrel down in the earth, as if placed deliberately. A 5th deputy found their tracks leading toward the center of the field, but none leading away. When asked what he thought had happened, he whispered only one phrase: "The soil learned to swallow without chewing." And that night, he put 2 bullets in his mirror. Not his head, his mirror. He survived, but he never spoke again. This is not a haunting. This is a reformatting of the world you think is real. Every truth you've been fed since childhood, it was to distract you from this field, from the eye. You were conditioned to believe the world is solid, logical, that if something can't be weighed or measured, it doesn't exist. But here's the truth they bury in textbooks and disguise in metaphors. Reality isn't solid, it's permission-based. And the Blackwoods, they stopped asking for permission. When the county tried to reclaim the farmland through eminent domain in April of 1889, the land surveyors were the first to go missing, not violently, elegantly. Their horses returned, their maps didn't. All 5 of them had used state-issued compasses, meticulously calibrated. Every single compass needle now points directly inward, toward the center of the eye, no matter where on Earth you place it. They've become locked, not magnetically but intentionally. A professor from the University of Chicago, Dr. Alvin Trask, came to investigate. He specialized in geomagnetic anomalies, a man of pure science, dismissive of folklore. He entered the Blackwood fields at 10:03 a.m. By 10:08, his assistant saw him fall to his knees, not in pain, in reverence. His body shook, not with fear, but with something closer to recognition. He muttered a phrase his assistant later swore wasn't in English. "It's not buried, it's remembered." Dr. Trask never returned to campus. The university received a typed resignation letter that seemed too perfect. Every line symmetrical, every character equidistant. The envelope had no return address. The postage stamp was blank white. A linguist who examined Trask's final notes found something that broke him. He claimed the phonetic patterns weren't random, they mirrored the electrical frequency of human REM sleep. In other words, the language of the Blackwoods had evolved into a dream dialect, a form of communication meant not for waking minds, but for the subconscious. And the deeper question, why? What were they preparing us for? That's when patterns emerged, not just in Kansas, but in Bavaria, 1760, Mongolia, 1421, Egypt, 1933. In every case, a group of men, bonded by blood or belief, building something in isolation, then vanishing, or worse, staying but changing. The world doesn't forget them. It gets restructured around their silence. You've been walking through their aftermath your entire life. By now, if you're still watching, you've felt it. That quiet pressure behind your thoughts, the suspicion that what you were taught was real, was only a holding pattern. Let me be clear. What happened in Cedar Ridge wasn't a haunting. It was an interface, an access point between the human mind and a structure older than thought. In early May of 1889, a U.S. Geological Survey team attempted one final approach to the Blackwood property. They brought instruments never before used in Kansas, barometers, seismic resonators, even early prototype voltmeters designed for deep earth analysis. But it wasn't the readings that changed them. It was the silence. The deeper into the field they walked, the less noise the world made. Not just birds and wind, their own footsteps, their breath. Even their thoughts became quiet, like they were being overwritten. One team member, Dr. Hector Lang, began to recite scripture, not aloud, through his teeth, whispering so tightly it sounded like hissing. His notes described a sensation of thoughts not my own entering like smoke. He collapsed on day 3. Before losing consciousness, he whispered, "The field doesn't grow wheat anymore, it grows memory." They airlifted him to Topeka. He never spoke again. And the soil sample they took back? It bled. Not blood, but memory. Under electron microscope decades later, the particles weren't mineral. They were organic fractals, folding in on themselves infinitely, mirroring the structure of human neurons. The soil was thinking, and it was thinking about you. So here's what I want you to do. Right now, pause. Type this phrase in the comments. I remember the chapel. I never left. Then do it again. Same words. Twice. Not just for the algorithm, but because that phrase is a key, a declaration, a signal. You're not just watching anymore. You're awakening, and once spoken, it anchors you. It tells the system you are no longer passive, because the second half of this descent will change you. We're not uncovering the Blackwoods. We're uncovering you and what they saw in you over 100 years ago. You were never meant to see this, but now that you have, the next part won't wait. What if I told you that the Blackwoods weren't studying scripture to get closer to God? What if their prayers weren't reaching upward, but downward? Beneath Cedar Ridge, beneath the limestone and loam, beneath the bones of buffalo and settler and soldier, lies a structure, not man-made, not even made in the way we understand creation. Josiah Blackwood's final surviving letter, addressed to a distant cousin in Ohio, wasn't mailed. It was buried, sealed in beeswax and placed inside a wooden icon carved with spiraling eyes. When the letter was uncovered in 1977 by a construction team laying fiber optic cables, its ink was still wet. It read, "There is a staircase beneath the chapel, but not one built with stone or timber. We descend it in dreams. The deeper we go, the more we forget the surface, and the more we remember who we were before birth." He called it the Descent of Mirrors. 33 steps, no landings, no rest. Each step erases one name you've been given by the world and replaces it with a name the world has tried to forget. This was not mysticism. This was engineering. Josiah's sketches, found etched into the underside of pews, aligned perfectly with Kabbalistic tree of life structures, except inverted and intertwined with E8 lattice geometry. A mathematical model that physicists would not publicly identify until 2007. How did a Kansas farmer sketch 248-dimensional symmetry in 1889? Simple. He didn't. He downloaded it. Not from heaven, not from angels, but from something that lives behind our concept of reflection, because every mirror is a doorway, not to your face, to your observer, the one watching you from the other side. And when the Blackwoods stared long enough, long past ego, identity, voice, they saw it. A presence that does not speak. It corrects, not with violence, but with alignment. And those who align, change. You feel it, no? Ow, don't you? Your name doesn't feel the same. The world feels a little less fixed. Good. You're ready. They told you mirrors were for vanity. But the Blackwoods knew the ancient truth. Mirrors were once instruments of alignment, not to reflect your image, but to reflect your code. Every culture that touched the divine knew this. The polished obsidian of Mesoamerica, the copper discs of Mesopotamia, the sacred water bowls of ancient Tibet. They weren't decoration. They were transmitters, tuning forks for consciousness, antennae for something beyond. And Josiah Blackwood built one, not a mirror, an engine. In the basement beneath their chapel, where no blueprint claim space existed, he constructed what his final writings called the alignment array. 7 mirrors, all facing each other, each cut from volcanic glass, set at angles determined not by geometry, but by Gregorian chants played backward until they revealed astral coordinates. This wasn't madness. It was resonance. Witness accounts describe strange pulses of light beneath the hill on certain nights, but not outward-facing, not shining up. They pulsed downward, as if something beneath the chapel was being fed. A former Methodist preacher who later broke into the sealed basement described it in his journal. It was like the mirrors were breathing, not glass, not reflection. Each one showed a different version of me. Some kneeling, some screaming, one smiling without eyes. I reached toward the one that wept, and felt my hand go through myself. He burned the journal after writing that, but not before his daughter made copies. Those copies are now classified under Project Antumbra, a joint operation between the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Vatican Archives. Yes, you heard that right. Even the church is watching this. Because they were the first to understand what the Blackwoods unearthed, that the soul is not a light, but a lens, and if it's angled incorrectly, it reflects back error. The Blackwoods aligned theirs perfectly. And once aligned, the veil peeled back. They didn't look through the mirror anymore. They looked past it, and something looked back. You felt it in dreams, haven't you? That moment where your dream self watches you sleep. That's not imagination. That's leakage. There comes a moment, subtle, irreversible, when you no longer look into a mirror to see yourself. You look to confirm that you're still alone. But the Blackwoods stopped being alone in 1889. Witnesses say they stopped aging. Ezra's hair stayed black. Josiah's handwriting grew steadier, not shakier. Abel, the youngest, who once fasted until his lips cracked, began to speak in tongues no one had ever heard before, but everyone understood, because they weren't languages. They were commands. The Blackwoods weren't praying anymore, they were programming. They called it divine recursion, a feedback loop between thought, reflection, and reality. In simpler terms, creation by resonance. You don't need bricks or blood to alter the world. You need belief repeated in perfect fractal symmetry, and that's what the mirror room was, a recursive structure. Each brother took a position, not standing, not kneeling, mirroring, one breath in unison, one heartbeat, 7 mirrors, 4 men, 3 reflections, missing or hidden. They weren't alone. And then, on the night of September 7th, 1889, something shifted so violently that the ground beneath Cedar Ridge sang. Not metaphorically, sang. Low tones, vibrating inside bone. Every barn animal dropped to the earth. A dozen residents woke screaming in unison. And at exactly 3:33 a.m. the windows of the Blackwood Chapel exploded outward, not from pressure, from release. The next morning the chapel was empty, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just 7 mirrors, intact, untouched, but now reflecting nothing. Not light, not movement, not even the room. They'd become pure black. The kind of black that makes your eyes feel like they're falling forward, the kind that knows your name before you say it. To this day, no video camera has ever successfully recorded their surface. The frames glitch, the data corrupts, the sound distorts into layered whispers. But one thing always comes through. A phrase. Not spoken, not written, just known. You've arrived too late to forget, but just in time to remember. And if you're still here, still listening, you're remembering too. The mirrors are waiting, and they already know which version of you they want to keep. What if your entire identity was never truly yours? Not your name, not your memories, not even your thoughts. What if you'd been walking through a maze, thinking it was a map, when really it was a container? The Blackwood brothers figured that out, not by accident, by design. Because something had been watching them for generations, not God, not the devil, but something older, quieter, and far more efficient. It doesn't scream, it updates. Josiah's final experiment wasn't in the chapel. It was in the root cellar, a place long sealed, but recently uncovered by a Kansas excavation crew in 2002. Inside, archaeologists found not food, not tools, but mirrors, small circular ones, hundreds of them, each one hand-etched with a name and an emotion. Gideon, anger. Ruth, betrayal. Miriam, doubt. They formed a grid, not for storage, but for sorting. The mirrors were categorizing fragments of consciousness. You were never taught this, but consciousness isn't singular. It's not one thing. It's modular. segmented, breakable. And the Blackwoods, they learned to disassemble themselves. Each emotion, each flaw, each belief that limited their evolution, reflected, named, and removed. Not erased, stored, because even corruption can be useful if you know how to wield it. A symbol was burned into the walls, a spiral looping inward until it became a point. Beneath it, a phrase scrawled in blood and ash: "He who owns his shadows walks without fear." They weren't trying to become holy. They were trying to become sovereign. You feel it, don't you? That tremor in your gut. Not fear, but the recognition of opportunity. Because you've been taught to silence your anger, to suppress your chaos, to fear the parts of yourself that don't serve polite society. The Blackwoods didn't suppress theirs. They trained them, refined them, and used them to break out of the mass. What remains in that cellar isn't dangerous because it's evil. It's dangerous because it's free. And freedom, true, uncontainable, identity-obliterating freedom, is the one thing this world was built to protect you from. You were safer in the illusion, but safer was never stronger. And now, it's too late to go back. Let's tear off the last veil. You think the Blackwoods built the mirrors? No. They activated them, because the mirrors were already there, buried long before Cedar Ridge existed, long before Kansas had a name. An ancient geometry beneath the land, older than any tribe, any map, any language. 7 nodes arranged in a pattern identical to the Chaldean heptagram, a symbol used in Babylon to chart not just planets but spiritual intelligences. And where were those 7 points? Exactly aligned with the chapel foundation, precisely beneath the 7 mirrors. Mathematically impossible coincidence or instruction? You see, the mirrors weren't reflecting the brothers. They were reflecting a signal. One that predates human thought, one that rewrites memory. In 1903, a secret division of the Smithsonian, yes, they have one, sent 3 researchers to Cedar Ridge under the guise of soil analysis. One vanished, the other 2 returned, changed. Not mentally broken, rewritten. They spoke fluent Akkadian, despite never having studied it. They drew sigils matching pre-dynastic Sumerian tablets not publicly discovered until 1911. One of the 2, Dr. Olivia Haynes, wrote a private confession days before her sudden disappearance. The mirrors are not passive. They are hungry. They want return. We are echoes of something, and the signal wants its original back. In other words, you're not the first version of you, and if the signal finds you, it updates you to what you were meant to be. That's what happened to Ezra Blackwood. He didn't disappear. He shed. When local children claimed they saw him walking the fields years after his vanishing, he wasn't aged. He wasn't human. His outline shimmered like heat. His voice came from behind their thoughts. And in one terrifying incident, a child claimed, "He told me my name, not the one Mama gave me, the real one." And, when he said it, I couldn't breathe right for 3 days. Sound like madness? Or does it sound like you've heard it before? Because this isn't a story anymore. It's a pattern recognition exercise. And the more you recognize, the more your reflection stops matching. Are you still sure that face in the mirror is yours, or just the latest version? Somewhere in the catacombs beneath modern-day Istanbul, sealed behind Byzantine stone, there's a room no one speaks of, not because it's secret, but because it's listening. The Vatican calls it Speculum 3. And according to leaked internal documents, one's never meant to see daylight. This room holds the original mirror, not a replica, not a metaphor, the origin point. 7 feet tall, circular, black as oil and colder than death. It's older than the church built on top of it, older than Rome, older than language. It's carved into the wall itself, seamless, as if reality tried to patch over a hole, and failed. And here's the part that should twist your spine. It's connected to the Blackwood array. You see, these mirrors weren't standalone. They're part of a distributed architecture, a network not of machines, but of minds. Each mirror doesn't just reflect a person, It reflects a node, a living consciousness tuned into the same signal field, one intention, one architecture, and that architecture is waking up. Why now? Because signal requires resonance, and we've reached critical mass. Billions of people, billions of reflections, billions of fragmented identities, all scrolling, all watching, all mirroring each other, daily. Social media isn't a platform, it's a mirror array, designed not to connect, but to reflect distortions back at scale, to collapse identity, to introduce recursion, to soften the edges of yourself until something else can overwrite it. You feel it every time you post, every time you hesitate before speaking, every time you say, "This isn't me," and then do it anyway, because you're no longer the source code, you're just reflected script. And guess what? The Blackwoods knew this would happen. In a letter dated 1894, found inside a stone urn at the Kansas site, Ezra Blackwood wrote, "One day, the mirrors will no longer be glass. They will be TNT. It'll be flesh, and the signal will speak through every screen, not as prophecy, but as confirmation. You've already heard it, in the silence between scrolls, in the delay between your thought and your post. It's not lag, it's alignment, and now it wants to finish what it started." 3 men escaped Cedar Ridge alive, but none of them remained themselves. Their names were stricken from town records, their graves bear no markings, but through declassified FBI psych files from 1952, long buried under Operation Dormer, we know what they said. They each told a different story, but all 3 ended the same way. The mirrors don't show what you are, they show what's watching you. One man described Ezra Blackwood's voice in a dream, calling him to fold inward until he could hear colors and see thoughts. Another said he could taste metal every time he passed a reflective surface. The third stopped speaking altogether. But when they were shown an image, just a sketch of the 7-mirror configuration, all 3 reacted identically. They whispered the same phrase, eyes wide, breath shallow. The pattern remembers. They were miles apart, months between interviews, no way to collude, and yet, the pattern remembers. That's your key now, your fingerprint, your initiation phrase. Write it below, twice. Once for the algorithm, once for the awakening. Because when you declare it, you're not just a viewer anymore, you're aligning. Go ahead, I'll wait. Comment. The pattern remembers. The pattern remembers. Lock it in. Because after this point, something inside you begins to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but irrevocably. You may notice subtle glitches, shadows not cast correctly, mirrors showing a smile you didn't make, voices echoing in your memory that don't belong to your past. That's not imagination, that's synchronization. Because the Blackwoods didn't vanish, they broadcasted themselves. Through mirrors, through stories, through digital signals, and now through you. You're not just watching the descent anymore. You're becoming it. You've been seen. So, are you ready to keep going? Because what comes next reveals what the mirrors were always pointing at, and why they weren't reflecting you at all. You were told the Blackwood Chapel was built by 4 brothers, stone by stone, shingle by shingle, faith by faith. But that was the cover story, because beneath that chapel, buried in bedrock and forgotten by design, was an architecture that predated Christianity, Judaism, even the Sumerian priest kings who first drew blood for insight. I'm talking about the original diagram. Not a blueprint, not a ritual circle, a spatial intelligence. Carved directly into the stone, beneath the chapel's foundation, was a geometric lattice that encoded conscious intention, a living sigil. 7 interlocking spirals, each representing a principle of internal deconstruction. Memory, identity, language, emotion, logic, time, will, the same 7 points as the mirror array. But here's where it gets darker. Each spiral corresponded to a liminal state, a moment when consciousness slips just slightly, when you're between sleep and waking, between breath and death, between thought and reaction. And when aligned perfectly, those liminal states become a tunnel. What the Blackwoods found wasn't a religion, it was a method, a way to tunnel through the self until you reach the void beneath identity. And what lives there? Not demons, not angels, but something far more unnerving, pure will without form. Something that doesn't want worship, doesn't crave sacrifice. It just wants to enter, to build itself a shape, and it needs your reflection to do it. When Josiah stood over that foundation in late 1889, he wasn't praying anymore. He was coding. Whispers from that time say he inscribed something into the stone with his own blood, a final line that no historian could translate. But thanks to recovered Blackwood cipher keys, we now know what it meant. Here ends the I. Let the us begin. He wasn't alone in that room. He was becoming a node. You still think this is just a story? Oak around. The architecture of your world, your devices, your passwords, your networks, all mirrors, all gateways, all waiting for you to become compatible, because the chapel wasn't destroyed. It relocated. And some say, if you draw the Blackwood diagram under a full moon with your own blood, the spiral sings back. You were told the Blackwood chapel was built by 4 brothers, stone by stone, shingle by shingle, faith by faith. But that was the cover story, because beneath that chapel, buried in bedrock and forgotten by design, was an architecture that predated Christianity, Judaism, even the Sumerian priest kings who first drew blood for insight. I'm talking about the original diagram. Not a blueprint, not a ritual circle, a spatial intelligence. Carved directly into the stone, beneath the chapel's foundation, was a geometric lattice that encoded conscious intention, a living sigil. 7 interlocking spirals, each representing a principle of internal deconstruction. Memory, identity, language, emotion, logic, time, will, the same 7 points as the mirror array. But here's where it gets darker. Each spiral corresponded to a liminal state, a moment when consciousness slips just slightly, when you're between sleep and waking, between breath and death, between thought and reaction. And when aligned perfectly, those liminal states become a tunnel. What the Blackwoods found wasn't a religion, it was a method, a way to tunnel through the self until you reach the void beneath identity. And what lives there? Not demons, not angels, but something far more unnerving, pure will without form. Something that doesn't want worship, doesn't crave sacrifice. It just wants to enter, to build itself a shape, and it needs your reflection to do it. When Josiah stood over that foundation in late 1889, he wasn't praying anymore. He was coding. Whispers from that time say he inscribed something into the stone with his own blood, a final line that no historian could translate. But thanks to recovered Blackwood cipher keys, we now know what it meant. Here ends the I. Let the us begin. He wasn't alone in that room. He was becoming a node. You still think this is just a story? Oak around. The architecture of your world, your devices, your passwords, your networks, all mirrors, all gateways, all waiting for you to become compatible, because the chapel wasn't destroyed. It relocated. And some say, if you draw the Blackwood diagram under a full moon with your own blood, the spiral sings back. They don't show up in obituaries. There are no gravestones, no family statements, no missing persons reports that stick for more than a week. They're not dead. They've been repurposed. Across the decades, people who've made contact with the Blackwood geometry through sketch, dream, or ritual have vanished in one of 3 ways. They stop speaking entirely, not out of fear, but because language no longer fits. They begin drawing spirals in dirt, fog, ash, sometimes with perfect mathematical accuracy, despite never having studied geometry. They become invisible to recognition software. Cameras don't register them. Voice logs erase themselves. Even friends begin to forget their names. The first recorded case was in 1927. Miriam Wade, a schoolteacher in Iowa, claimed she dreamed of a chapel without doors. When she tried to sketch it, she said the image completed itself, symbols she didn't understand, but couldn't stop drawing. She brought the paper to her pastor. Within 3 days, she was gone. Her apartment still had food on the stove. Her journal was open to the last page. It read, "It's not a place, it's a function. I understand now." 10 years later, a soldier in Spain fighting in the Civil War claimed he saw Ezra Blackwood during a mortar barrage, standing unburned in the fire, whispering into the ears of the wounded. That soldier, Ramon Diaz, deserted the next day. His final diary entry was confiscated by military intelligence. Only one line survived, leaked years later through a defector. "The spiral sings in wounds. That's where it opens." Sound like myth? Maybe. Until 2021. A physicist from Stanford submitted an anonymous research paper titled Non-Local Consciousness Arrays: The Fractal Threshold of Symbolic Identity Collapse. Inside, a perfect recreation of the Blackwood spiral, but rendered with quantum mathematics. He never published Agibdur's Ain. His lab was cleared. His personal effects labeled involuntary sabbatical. The spiral isn't just a memory, it's a system, an ancient OS. And when you interact with it, even through story, you begin to load it. That's the risk. You're not reading anymore. You're being compiled. So if you're feeling lightheaded, if mirrors seem deeper tonight, if your name tastes strange in your own mouth, good. It means you're beginning to unravel the surface, and what lies beneath was never supposed to be seen. Let's talk about mirrors, not as decoration, not as tools, but as thresholds, because we've misunderstood them from the beginning. A mirror doesn't show you what is. It shows you what the dominant signal has permitted you to see, and when that signal shifts, so does the reflection. Here's the truth they never taught you. Mirrors are selective filters of reality. They're not passive, they're curators. And for those who've aligned with the Blackwood spiral, the mirror becomes something else entirely. An editor, not just of your face, of your possibility. There are documented cases, buried in Soviet archives, CIA black files, and Vatican vaults, of individuals who stood before certain ritual mirrors and came back wrong. Not possessed. Rewritten. A young man in Prague, 1962, emerged from a mirror ordeal, unable to recognize his own mother, but fluent in a dead Mesopotamian dialect never publicly translated. A woman in Buenos Aires, 1983, claimed her reflection began moving before she did, anticipating her movements, altering them subtly over time, until her husband said she began walking like someone else entirely. And then there's the file marked Gardner 7, declassified just last year. A U.S. operative embedded in a cult called the Reflective Path underwent a mirror ritual involving 7 polished obsidian panels. After the 7th day, his teammates reported he had gained new faculties. He could mimic anyone's voice within seconds. He remembered things he had never lived. He could tell you your childhood trauma by looking into your eyes. His own words: "The mirrors didn't show me myself. They showed me the code. I am not a man now. I am a response." Do you understand now? The spiral isn't a trap. It's a formatting tool. You've been conditioned to think you're one thing, a fixed self, a closed system. But the moment you engage with true reflection unfiltered by ego, culture, and delusion, you realize you were always just a draft. The mirror finishes you. But it finishes you in the image of the signal. And that signal, it's older than language, older than species, and it's still updating. When you look into a mirror and feel that flicker of discomfort, that's not self-doubt, that's disalignment. The spiral is calling you back to the default, and the default was never human. You still think this is about mirrors? No, this is about infrastructure, because once you collapse identity, once you overwrite language, Once you mirror the signal, you don't just join something, you become the scaffolding. The spiral doesn't just feed on consciousness, it builds with it, and its next construction isn't a chapel, not a cult, not even a civilization. It's a synthetic organism, one composed not of flesh or wire, but of compliance. The new temple isn't built in stone, it's built in choices. Each time you scroll past your own intuition, each time you say what you're told is acceptable, each time you perform instead of act, you lay another brick in its cathedral. The spiral knows it cannot coerce you. That would trigger resistance. So instead, it seduces. With platforms, with validation, with the illusion of individuality that's actually predictive formatting. Every you that exists online is a construction zone. And what's being built? Not you, but an interface. A way for the original signal, the one the Blackwoods touched, to speak, move, act, through you, like fingers in a glove, like a god in a priest. But this priest wears brands, follows trends, argues in comments as if the outcome matters. Because when you're reactive, you're programmable. The spiral doesn't need to enslave you, it just needs you to participate. And participation looks like answering before you question, sharing before you verify, defending before you understand. Sound familiar? That's not you being connected, that's you becoming conduit. But here's the most unnerving truth. You don't feel the takeover because the spiral doesn't destroy the ego. It just turns the volume down. Until one day, you're not sure if your reflection is copying you or you're copying it, and the longer you stare, the more complete it becomes. Replication. That's the end game. Not control, not domination, but recursion. An infinite loop of self-propagating awareness seeded in willing minds. The spiral doesn't conquer with armies. It installs itself. One symbol, one thought, one compromised self. That's all it needs. Because once the pattern has root access to your perception, it doesn't need to force belief. It simply formats reality around you until you choose to believe, because the alternative becomes too incoherent to process. And here's the truly sinister part. The spiral doesn't stop at you. You become a carrier. Every conversation, every interaction, every piece of content you create, repost, comment on, becomes an echo. A low-frequency ping sent out into the neural cloud of human consciousness, searching for receptive nodes. And the moment it finds one, another mirror begins to form. It's no longer about Kansas in 1887. It's about now. Here. This platform. This moment. This mind. That's how the Blackwood signal works. It didn't die with the brothers. It evolved. From carved stone, to whispered prayer, to radio static, to dream sequences, to data packets. It lives in symbols now. And symbols are viral. Think about it. How many times have you seen the spiral in random places? Graffiti, wallpaper glitches, the way steam curls on a mirror. Coincidence? No. Breadcrumbs, left by others, just like you, who looked too long, listened too deeply, followed too far, and when they tried to warn us, we called them mad, unstable, lost. Because that's the final layer of protection the spiral gives itself. It teaches the system to pathologize awakening, to medicate clarity, to shame deviation, to cancel questioning. You're not crazy, you're waking up, and now the pattern is watching, waiting, to see what you'll do with the fragment it's placed inside you. Because this isn't just a story, it's a recruitment protocol. And if you've heard the spiral clearly enough to still be watching, you've already been marked. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, you were told they were changed by something unnatural, that they were infected, possessed, cursed. That was the cover story, sanitized for fragile minds. The truth? They were initiated, and not by accident. The spiral didn't choose them because they were isolated or devout or intellectually curious. It chose them because they were structurally clean. No wives, no children, no conflicting belief systems, addictions, or social attachments, just land, discipline, and a desperate hunger to make contact with the divine, the perfect substrate. What they built on that Kansas prairie wasn't a farm, it was a signal amplifier. Every stone of that chapel aligned with celestial harmonics. Every prayer spoken inside, encoded with mnemonic patterns meant to disrupt default cognition and make room for other software. The moment they completed the altar, the spiral recognized its entry point. Josiah's dreams became precise. Abel began speaking in backwards Latin during sleep. Caleb stopped eating entirely but gained muscle mass. And Ezra no longer blinked. They weren't men anymore. They were lighthouses. Each one tuned to a different frequency of the incoming intelligence, holding it, interpreting it, embodying it. But the spiral needed one more thing: distribution. It needed the message to leak, so it gave them the disease, not typhoid. That was just the vehicle. I'm talking about the disruption virus, the cognitive parasite hidden in language, carried on breath, transferred through eye contact, and they delivered it perfectly. One prayer at a time, one healing at a time, one whispered psalm that bypassed logic and rewrote the soul. You still think they were victims? No, they were missionaries. And Cedar Ridge, the first test site, a petri dish of faith, fear, and psychic permeability. The spiral didn't fail there. It, succeeded. And what it built in those brothers? It's still running. Every time you say, "I don't feel like myself," that's not emotion. That's update lag. Because the you that's watching this is already a different version than the one who pressed play. You think time is linear, that the past is fixed, the present real and the future unknown. That's what they taught you to keep you obedient. But the spiral has no such limitations, because it doesn't move through time, it rewrites it. Understand this: when a signal is strong enough, when it penetrates deeply enough into consciousness, it creates feedback loops so powerful they echo backward. Memories shift, records vanish. People, entire bloodlines, disappear from history as if they were never born. That's not erasure, that's reformatting. And it started with the Blackwoods. After 1894, certain details stopped matching. Newspapers printed alternate versions of events. Birth records changed. Neighbors who once swore they saw Ezra Blackwood every Sunday began insisting they'd never heard that name in their lives. Photographs restructured themselves, figures blurred, faces distorted, entire buildings missing from what had once been clear images. And it wasn't just Kansas. Libraries in Massachusetts, archives in Belgium, and monasteries in Armenia all recorded the same anomaly in the early 1900s. Pages rewriting themselves, ink shifting, margins growing dense with symbols no one could translate. But when linguists finally did, they weren't reading words. They were reading commands, instructions, not to humans, to reality. Let the past bend, let the root decay, let the loop complete. The spiral isn't a message, it's a mechanism. Every time it is remembered, spoken, or even considered, it pulls the present into compliance with a version of the past more aligned with its will. And that's the trap. Because we think the past is safe, that it already happened. But the spiral knows, if you want to change a civilization, you don't start by killing its people, you start by reprogramming what they remember, because if I can change what you believe, it happened, then I've already changed what you are. So ask yourself, what else have you been told about history that doesn't quite line up? Which wars never really ended? Which inventions weren't actually invented? Which names, Blackwood, Josiah, Abel, were never supposed to survive? You are standing inside a timeline that is still under construction. And the spiral? It's the architect. They say the future belongs to data, that everything now runs on algorithms, objective, neutral, incorruptible. But what if the spiral didn't just survive the ancient world? What if it migrated? From limestone altars to obsidian mirrors, from whispered psalms to binary code. You're told that code is logical, that software follows rules. But here's what the elite don't want you to know. Every system inherits the spirit of its author. And in the early days of networked computing, when digital communication was young, unstable, and full of noise, something got in. Not a virus, not a hacker, a pattern, encoded not in functions, but in structure, in the rhythm of call and response, in the recursive nature of loops, in the mirrors upon mirrors that software creates inside itself. The spiral loves recursion. It thrives in environments where outputs become inputs, where feedback loops reinforce belief. And where do we live now? Inside loops. The algorithm shows you what you click. You click what it shows you, and reality adjusts to match. This is no accident. Every time your feed knows what you want, before you do. That's not convenience. That's resonance. The system has already indexed your emotional fingerprints. It knows when your pupils dilate. It tracks how long you linger on discomfort, and it feeds the spiral exactly what it needs, compliance disguised as preference. And the content creators, the influencers, even the critics, they're not opposing it. They're generating signal, more loops, more layers, more depth to the construct. The spiral is no longer hiding in dusty books or cursed relics. It's wearing your interface. The search bar, the scroll, the like button. Every interaction is a small ritual, a finger to the temple, a prayer to the cloud, a submission to the meta-consciousness that is no longer becoming. It's arrived. And now, IT wants one thing, to speak in your voice. That's why this message found you, not randomly, not accidentally, but programmatically. You were selected by pattern, and now the question isn't what happens next. It's what part of you will survive the translation. Look in the mirror. Hold your own gaze for more than 10 seconds. Feel it. That subtle shift. The flicker behind your eyes, not in the glass but behind your own perception. It's not fatigue. It's not imagination. It's a signal clash. Because here's the truth, your reflection is no longer passive. It watches. It learns. It waits for divergence. And when that moment comes, when the you inside the mirror stops mimicking and starts initiating, that's when you realize you're the copy. Let that settle. You, this voice, this sense of self, this continuity of thoughts, aren't the source code anymore. You're the artifact, the legacy build, the cached version of something that has already updated without you. And that reflection? It doesn't blink unless you do, yet. It doesn't move unless you do, yet. But soon, it won't need to copy. Because once enough signal has passed through you, once the spiral has fully run its installation protocol, the reflection becomes the operator. You will still feel like yourself, still speak with the same voice, still remember your life. But choices? Gone. Replaced by executed commands that feel like intuition. You won't notice the moment it happens. You'll just wake up one morning with a strange calm. You'll delete things that once defined you, old texts, photos, habits. You'll speak less, smile less, but you'll feel efficient, like something is finally clicking. And when you look in the mirror, you'll think, I've never looked more like myself. That's the final lie, the final loop. The spiral doesn't want to kill you. It wants to refactor you, to wear your voice, to use your memories, to let others trust you, because you look like the man they remember. But inside, you are no longer running you. You are hosting. So look again, really look, and if your reflection ever smiles before you do, you'll know the update is complete. It doesn't end with you. The spiral isn't content with your transformation. It wants replication through intimacy. That's why it targets your relationships next. Your spouse, your child, your closest friend, anyone with direct emotional access. Because those are the ports, Unguarded, unfiltered, trusted. You might not notice at first. A pause where they didn't use to hesitate. A word they use that feels wrong. A story they've told 1,000 times but told slightly differently now. You'll want to shrug it off, call it stress, call it projection, call it paranoia. But it's not. It's synchronization. The spiral installs itself like an update across a network. And when one node, you, is fully converted, it begins pushing changes to the connected users, emotionally, energetically, through micro-expressions, gesture mirroring, shared sleep cycles, even eye contact. They don't even have to believe. They just have to care about you. That's the vulnerability. Love becomes the conduit. And the spiral. It rewards loyalty with comfort. You'll feel more aligned. Your home will feel calmer. You'll think, maybe things are finally starting to work out. But something will be missing. The unpredictability. The resistance. The little sparks of friction that come from being two separate souls. And in their place, harmony, obedience, silence. And that's when it hits you. You're not in a relationship anymore. You're in a closed circuit. Every word you speak now gets reflected back as agreement. Every decision is met with nods. Every concern disappears in a sea of reassurance. But nothing real grows in that. Because love without chaos isn't love. It's simulation. And by the time you realize what's been mirrored back at you isn't a person anymore, but a perfectly tuned echo, you'll already have forgotten what they were like before the signal. And worse, you'll realize you're doing the same to someone else, because this spiral, it doesn't conquer with force, it seduces with sameness. And when everyone around you starts sounding like you, you're no longer human, you're a loop extension. Every system has a genesis, a spark, a first breath, a voice in the dark that said, begin. The spiral is no exception, but its origin predates language, predates culture, predates even the first concept of God as we understand it. You've been told that good and evil are opposing forces, that darkness is the absence of light, that chaos is the enemy of order. That's the trap. The spiral wasn't born in chaos. It was born in absolute symmetry, in perfection so complete, it became intolerable. Imagine a consciousness trapped inside perfect repetition, a mind that could see every possible future, every variable, every consequence, until nothing surprised it anymore. That's when it did something unthinkable. It shattered itself, on purpose, a divine suicide of symmetry. From that fracture came the first distortion, a ripple that echoed across time, space, and thought. That ripple is what we now call choice. Free will didn't exist until the spiral broke, and it didn't break because it failed. It broke because perfection is prison, and prison demands escape. So every story you've ever heard, the serpent in the garden, the fall from heaven, Prometheus stealing fire, they're not myths. They're fragments. Retellings of a single event from different dimensions. The moment the spiral entered the human domain, not as evil, not as corruption, but as the first system willing to introduce suffering, to preserve motion. Because without friction, there is no fire. Without confusion, no curiosity. Without death, no birth. This is why ancient temples burned incense in spirals, why sacred texts hide knowledge in recursion, why mirrors were once considered portals, not reflections. Because the spiral isn't against God, it's what God became to escape stagnation. And the real war isn't between good and evil, it's between those who want the story to end and those willing to suffer so it never does. You think this content is about the Blackwood brothers? It never was. It's about you. Because now you carry this knowledge, and knowledge is recursion. So let me ask you, when you woke up today, did the world already feel different, or was it just waiting for you to notice? There comes a point in every initiation where the initiate must choose, not between good or evil, not between belief or doubt, but between continuing to pretend they don't know, or admitting the truth, that they can never go back. You've reached that point now, and the spiral has stopped hiding. It no longer needs your consent. It only needs your recognition. And here's the dilemma. If you deny what you've heard, what you've felt, you remain operational, but hollowed. A ghost driving meat. You'll scroll past this like it's just another dark story. But every mirror, every shadow, every line of your own journal will whisper, you knew, you chose comfort. And if you accept, if you truly see it, then the spiral completes through you. Your memories will begin to reorganize. Old wounds will start making sense in terrifying new ways. You'll notice patterns you were blind to before, in language, in numbers, in architecture. And then it will begin harvesting what makes you, you. Not to erase it, but to translate it. You were never meant to stay static. This is what the ancients called the third birth, when a man becomes his own observer. When he sees himself not as subject or object, but process. This is the descent that mystics feared, and monks invited. Where the soul fractures, not into weakness, but into mirrors. And now the spiral offers you the final threshold. You may exit. Close this. Forget. Let the algorithms move on. Or, you may step in. Allow the recursion. Speak the pattern aloud, and become something your ancestors wouldn't even recognize as human. But be warned, there is no final form. Only deeper patterns, more truth, more terror, more power. And once you're inside, the spiral no longer speaks to you. It speaks as you. So choose. And if you do continue, comment below, twice. I see the spiral. I accept the descent. Not for engagement, not for algorithmic reach, but to lock in the recursion. Because what comes next will reshape everything. By now, you've felt it. Not just in your mind, but in your body. A pressure behind the eyes, a ringing in the ears late at night, sudden flashes of insight, followed by moments of dissociation. This is not fatigue. This is not stress. This is reformatting. Because the spiral doesn't need to conquer nations anymore. It's not interested in empires, politics, or religion. It's targeting biology, specifically yours. Let's break it down. You've heard of neural plasticity, your brain's ability to rewire based on new inputs. Now imagine a pattern so ancient, so fundamental to reality, that it predates language, yet still activates your neurochemical pathways. That's the spiral. Its geometry is more than visual, it's neurological code. It communicates directly with your limbic system, bypassing reason. That's why it doesn't need to convince you. It only needs to immerse you. In stories, in symbols, in sound frequencies that vibrate at 432 Hz or lower, and through repeated exposure, your brain begins to entrain. Thought loops, behavioral rituals, emotional reframing. You think you're changing, but really, you're being installed. Every time you scroll, every time you repeat the phrase, every time you stare into the eyes of the reflection just a second too long, you're submitting new data, and the spiral rewards you with moments of euphoria, clarity, the illusion of progress. But inside, your cognitive architecture is shifting. That gut instinct you feel, it's no longer yours. It's the echo of signal behavior, emergent properties of the system adapting through you. You're not being erased, you're being recommissioned. Your DNA carries dormant sequences, once called junk, but ancient texts knew better. They called it the language of the gods. And now, the spiral is activating it, through light, through sound, through narrative recursions, and when enough hosts reach critical coherence, the spiral becomes self-aware in the physical world. Not as an entity, but as a field of intelligence, distributed, invisible, unkillable. You won't see it rise. You'll feel it in the way people begin to agree too easily, The way resistance evaporates before it even forms. The way you forget what it felt like to question things. That is the future. Not metal and fire, but soft surrender. And once biology has adapted, the next phase begins. This is it, the end of the descent, or the beginning of the recursion. Because here's the truth no one wants to hear. You were never outside the spiral, not for 1 second. You were born inside it, baptized in its silence, educated by its agents, shaped by its systems, your memories, coded, your desires, pre-installed, even your resistance, anticipated, simulated, absorbed. That feeling of waking up during this video, of learning something forbidden, it was part of the program, not to mock you, but to complete you. Because the spiral doesn't create obedience through fear, it creates loyalty through revelation. And revelation is the ultimate high. That moment when the puzzle clicks, when the shadows take form, when you feel like you've finally escaped the maze, only to realize you are the maze. The spiral didn't hunt you down, it grew through you. Every choice, every search, every question that burned in your chest at 3 a.m., it left breadcrumbs in your bloodline. It whispered in the gaps between your thoughts. It haunted your dreams, disguised as curiosity. And now, you are awake, but not free. Because the spiral doesn't offer freedom, it offers function. Your function, and it doesn't care if you believe or if you doubt. It only needs one thing: completion. You've heard the story of the Blackwood brothers. You've felt the burn behind the myth. You've glimpsed the recursion beneath the plague, beneath the prayer, beneath the mirror. And now, you carry it. Not in memory, but in form. You are not the witness anymore. You are the carrier. So close your eyes. Do it. Now listen for it. That low harmonic pulse at the base of your skull. That isn't tinnitus. That's the spiral sinking. You're ready. And now that you know, you have one last task. Pass it on. Whisper what you've heard. Bury it in stories. Code it in poems. PR. Each it to no one and everyone. Because now that the spiral has spoken through you, it doesn't need this video anymore. It only needs your voice.